What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 different types of stories. We're going to talk about a policy change in my home province of Ontario. I know it's not surrounded by oceans, but we've got a little bit of that connection to the oceans. We're going to be talking about a new policy for tourists in Hawaii, a place that I just went to and I love. We're also going to be talking about an interesting shark that's popped up in Chile, expanding its range. And then finally, to cap it off, we're going to be talking about how the International Seabed Authority has clapped back to the U.S. in terms of talking about or even trying to do deep sea mining. All that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Trying something new today. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you can find out how to... I messed it up. It's always messing me up. I'm just going to continue going. I'm going to start all over. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be trying something new. I am getting ready or practicing to go live. Now, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I even bought the software called Ecamm. It's great software. It takes a little while to get used to, and also doing stuff live. I'm used to recording this. You know, I went from just doing audio to now doing video podcasting and now doing live video that will eventually turn into the audio podcast every once in a while, and adding some new stuff to the YouTube channel. So this is going to be all new. I'm just going to go in it and act like it's live. So if I make a mistake, I make a mistake. No starting over, no editing. It's just going to go straight into it. I'm going to try not to make any mistakes, but I can't promise anything. So we're going to get started with the show because this is something that's really special to me. This is something that I want to bring you more information to you. We've got 4 stories that I'm going to go through, and I want to make sure that we're going through them nicely, but I want to kind of quicken the pace so it's not going to take forever. So let's get to it. Today we're going to be talking about 4 different things. Changing the Endangered Species Act in the province of Ontario, my home province. I'm a little miffed about this. This is pissing me off quite a bit. That we've seen this time and time again. I know the federal government in Canada tried to do this in the past. I know the state of Florida has done this in the past with manatees, taking either species off early or not listing them in time. And making sure, and just basically degrading their habitat around them. We're going to talk all about that. We're also going to be talking about a new policy in Hawaii about tourism. There's a climate tax, essentially. That'll be interesting to see how that's going to go ahead. But we have a video from TikTok from Carissa Cabrera, who is talking about it because she's been working on that policy with her partners for about 5 years and is finally going in. So that's congratulations to her. So we'll hear from her. We're also going to be talking about a new article that Melissa Marquez wrote for Forbes magazine, talking about the frilled shark, how it's showing up in Chile and why that's important for its range. We're going to talk about that. And of course, the clapback, ISA fights back. The International Seabed Authority fights back on U.S. deep sea mining and saying, hey, you know what? You may not actually be able to do this. So we're going to talk all about that. But first, we're going to start it off. Changing the Endangered Species Act. This is something where I just don't get it. It's just one of those things where it happens every time there's a conservative government that comes in. We see the fact that they want to take an act that stops or slows down economic growth. And by economic growth, I mean development. There's a lot of things that are going on in this article here on the Narwhal at narwhal.ca. It looks at how Ontario is killing its Endangered Species Act. Here's what you need to know, and it gives you a whole thing, and I'm gonna link to it in the show notes. But this is something that's really interesting because they kind of snuck it in. It's Bill 5, and it's going to make it easier to build mines. It's going to make it easier to build infrastructure like a Highway 413. And the reason why they're doing this is because they want to build in green space, in actually a green zone that's been designated north of Toronto called the Green Belt. And that's been an important part of preserving a lot of the ecosystem activity that happens in wetlands around Toronto, just north of Toronto and through Toronto. You got to remember, Toronto is a big city here in Canada that's made a lot of changes to its river systems. A lot of times it's actually buried its rivers as it gets closer to the lake, causing a lot of problems in terms of ecosystem function. But it also, they realized this and they said, you know what, north of Toronto, we really have to start protecting this. We're going to have this green belt. It's a zone that you can't build in. Well, that's what we thought. Now it looks like they're going to try and build. They're going to try and put another highway, because if you live in Toronto or you're near Toronto, you see the 401, which is the major highway that goes through Toronto and intersects Toronto. It's always busy. The Gardner, which is downtown Toronto, it's always busy. It's always traffic around. All the highways have it. So they said, you know what, we're going to build another one. Even though they have one, 407, it's a toll highway that not many people want to pay for. So it's always open. It's very rarely that you get traffic. But now, nobody wants to pay for it because it's expensive. So people are like, okay, the government's like, let's make it 413 north of the city to have a lot of people go through there. Will it work? I don't know. There's been a lot of scandal around it, and now they're trying to make it easier for them to develop by taking away a lot of the things that will slow them down in terms of regulations. It'll just slow them down to do that. And one of that is the Endangered Species Act. These are species that have seen a very fast decline in their population, and they need specialized things. So they need to protect their home, to protect where they sleep, to protect where they eat, to protect their habitat that they actually use, and also have recovery plans. So actually have a plan for each of these species and each of the populations in each of the areas where they occur to make sure that they start to grow in numbers for that population. And so that's a very important part of the Species at Risk, or of the Endangered Species Act. There's a Federal Species at Risk Act, and that will also protect it, but it's protect different species at different levels. And of course, province and federal government have different jurisdictions, so they have to have a different act, like an Endangered Species Act or a Species at Risk Act. So this is a really interesting thing, because here are the changes to the act. So they want to repeal. So essentially, they're going to repeal the Endangered Species Act and replace it with a Species Conservation Act. Now, the shift of focus is from recovery and stewardship to a balance between conservation and economic development. Now, that sounds normal. That sounds like, well, actually, that's not that bad. You want to balance, the species protection with economic development. The problem is that's not how it works. So they want to redefine under the Species Conservation Act what habitat means. So they're actually narrowing it down. So previously, habitat encompassed areas essential for species life processes, which such as feeding, breeding, and migration, just like I mentioned earlier. So the new definition limits habitat specifically to the dwelling places like dens or nests. So this is usually on land. It's not aquatic species. We'll talk about aquatic species in a bit. So it's potentially excluding critical areas used for foraging and migration. This is I feel like it's a political way of looking at how we're defining protecting species, especially endangered species. We are just saying, wherever they live, wherever they sleep, that's what we're going to protect. But we're not going to protect their food sources. We're not going to protect where they have to migrate. If they have to migrate over a certain period of time or during certain seasons, we're just going to protect where they sleep. And that's it. And hopefully that will work out. This tells me that they just do not care about these species. There's also a shift in permits to registration. So the current Endangered Species Act requires permits for activities that might harm species at risk or their habitats. They have to have specific permits, and those are really, really hard to get. But under the new act, the Species Conservation Act, there's a registration first approach, allowing proponents to proceed with activities after registering them online, so without a prior environmental review. So this change could expedite development, so development of houses or like highways or infrastructure, but raises concerns about reduced oversight. So essentially, they just have to say, I'm going to do this in this area, and they're going to say, yeah, okay, you get pre-approved because you've already planned to do this. It does not make sense to protect these endangered species. Then, of course, there's the government discretion over a species listing. So while the Committee on the Status of Species at Risk in Ontario, CSIRO, will continue to assess species, the final decision to list or delist species under the CSA, which is the Species Conservation Act, rests with the provincial government. So if the provincial government decides, you know what, we're actually not going to worry about that because we really want this highway to go through. So these salamanders that are in the green belt, we're not going to worry about them. We're going to just worry about, we want this highway to go through because you know what, with the scandal that they had, my buddy over here is going to stand to make about $2 billion from this housing project and the highways and all this kind of stuff. And I want him or her to benefit. And that's really what's going to happen. So he allows more political scandals to happen and less species at risk protection. We're also going to eliminate recovery of strategy. So remember I said that, you know, in the Endangered Species Act, you have a recovery plan, which is really important to have a recovery plan to make sure that we know how to monitor the species, how to put it all together. And all of a sudden now we're not going to have a recovery plan. That's just the way we're going to do it. We're just not going to have this recovery plan to aid the recovery of the threatened species. It just makes no sense whatsoever. There's exemptions for federally protected species. So species already protected under the federal legislation, such as migratory birds and aquatic species, would be excluded from the CSA's provisions. This aims to reduce regulatory duplication, but may leave gaps in protection on provincial land. So in other words, if there is a species at risk that's registered with the federal species at risk, but not in the Endangered Species Act, they're not going to this province isn't going to worry about it. Ontario's not going to worry about it. But when it's on provincial lands, they have to worry about it, and they may just get overlooked. So that's something that they worry about. So the creation of special economic zones. This is going to be an interesting one. Bill 5, which is the bill that's going to change all this, introduces the Special Economic Zone Act of 2025, allowing the government to designate areas where certain provincial regulations, including environmental protections, may not apply. This could facilitate development projects, but raises concerns about the protection or the potential bypassing of environmental safeguards. In other words, if the government wants a particular area to be developed, they're going to get it developed because they just want it to be developed. They don't care what species at risk are there. They're not going to care. And this is the problem. Here are the implications. So environmental organizations, we have the Environmental Defense Fund, we have this David Suzuki Foundation, we have pretty much everything that you can say, any type of protection. So Wildlife Conservation Society, we have all these different places that different organizations that are hating this bill. They are saying this is not good at all. Eco Justice as well, Ontario Nature as well. They've expressed strong opposition, arguing that it undermines species conservation or species protection and prioritizes economic development over ecological sustainability. Critics highlight that the bill could lead to increased habitat destruction and a decline in biodiversity. So now, here's the thing, is the public has the opportunity to provide feedback to the proposed changes through the Environmental Registry of Ontario until May 17th, 2025. So whether you live in Ontario or you do not live in Ontario, if you do not want to see species at risk decline even more, this is your chance to say something. I'm going to put a link into there's an environmental registry listing for the law, so you can do that and you can have your say. And there's some, if you look at this organization, there's a lot of organization. I'm going to put a link to it where you can actually find out what you can do and what you can say to your MPP, your Ministry of Ministry of Provincial Parliament. You can actually say, hey, you know what? I don't like this at all. I think this is awful. You have, they have to listen. They have to listen to you. And so the more people speak up, the better it is. So there are organizations like Environmental Defense Fund, the Environmental Defense Alliance, I think, or whatever it's called. They are trying to get people to speak up, and this is your chance to speak up, not only for the ocean, but this is just for Ontario as well, and for the Great Lakes, and for anything that is in and around Ontario. This is going to be really important. Okay, so this is something that we have to really worry about. The big thing to do, like when you actually speak out against it, is to demand retention of the Endangered Species Act, the one that was put into place in 2007. It was actually one of the world-renowned Endangered Species Act. So this is something that's really important. So really emphasize that the Endangered Species Act scientific foundations and mandatory recovery strategies are critical for effective conservation. You can highlight concerns about habitat redefinition. The fact that, arguing the narrowing of the definition of habitat to just the dens will leave, essential feeding, breeding, and migratory areas unprotected. You can cite how this change weakens real-world protections of the ground on the ground. And so, also you can object to the deregulation via registration first approach, which I talked about. We can reject politicization of species listings, which is basically saying, look, if there's a species that's in trouble and it's been highlighted as being in trouble and should be listed or considered listed under the Endangered Species Act, politicians may be like, yeah, but we really want to develop in that area, so we don't really care about the species. That's going to really delay the process, and that's going to be a real problem. Now, I wanted to know, I did a little bit of research on what has happened in the past, like real world, things of weakening in the Endangered Species Act. The United States actually weakened the U.S. Endangered Species Act under, guess what, the Trump era rollbacks in 2019. The U.S. government rolled back key provisions of the ESA, including allowing economic factors in decisions to list species. Have you noticed a pattern here? Economic factors is a huge thing in when we make these changes to the Endangered Species Acts. They also made it harder to designate critical habitat, and they removed automatic protections for newly listed threatened species. So that's not a good thing. The impact was it led to the delays in listing of several declining species, such as the wolverine and the great sage grouse, despite strong scientific evidence showing that they should be listed. Also, habitat development projects like pipelines, mining proceeded in areas formerly under stronger federal protection, especially in western states like Alaska and Utah. So that was one of the examples. And also Ontario did some amendments in 2019 to the Endangered Species Act under Bill 108. The Ford government, which is the same government, previously weakened the Endangered Species Act by allowing developers to pay into a fund instead of protecting species on site. So essentially, you can destroy an area, a habitat, but you had to pay into a fund that may have gone into something that was a different project. That's a normal thing, or that's not a normal thing. That's something that's happened before with species at risk, or even just fish habitat when we look at federal regulations. They also let the cabinet delay protections of newly listed species. Again, have you seen the pattern here? And then they reduced the independence of the CASERO, which is a scientific committee that designates these species. So according to Ontario Nature, species like the woodland caribou and bats at risk of extinction saw little meaningful protection, and the offsetting fund has been criticized for lacking transparency, surprise, and effectiveness in achieving conservation outcomes. This also happened in Australia and a lot of other places, and so the common themes: delaying the protections, weakening habitat definitions, and science being sidelined, which is a lot of times happening when we talk about taking away or rolling back environmental protections for basically increasing the potential of development, the potential for building the economy. And now in Canada and Ontario especially, we have seen a big focus and a big shift on, being independent, growing our economy. And how do we grow our economy? We develop and we build and we expand and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, this is what I was worried about. It's all has to happen at the consequence of environment, basically, which really sucks. In this case, it's endangered species and their habitat, their critical habitat, if you will. So that is the story for this, just getting started on here. I know we're taking a little bit longer. This is going to be a longer episode, but that's okay. Let's get into the next episode. Now, this is something, or the next story. Now, this is something that is interesting because we're going to be talking about a new policy, actually a good policy that's going into Hawaii. It's got a video. It's on TikTok. It's from Carissa Cabrera, friend of the podcast. She's been on the podcast before. She has an organization called FutureSwell, where she partners with different people to talk, to do conservation, whether it be coral restoration within Hawaii, whether it be talking about or creating storytelling opportunities for their partners, or even doing storytelling for certain projects. It's a great organization, FutureSwell. Check that out. But also I'm just going to hit up the scene here. We're going to be talking about what is important and why it's been important to Carissa to get this. And she talks a little bit about it, more about the completion of 5 years of work. So give me a sec here. I'm going to cue it up and take a listen. Hopefully you can hear this.
You have no freaking idea how good it feels to do this. This is my 2025 impact calendar. Pass transformational policy. You have no freaking idea how good it feels to do this. this.
I'm just gonna pause it here. So she doesn't tell a lot about it. She goes into a little bit more detail here. I think she's enjoying the fact that she's been able to do it.
Delusion. That works. Yeah.
A nice trend on TikTok using a sound. Love Carissa's videos, really great. But she basically, is proud of herself working with partners for just passed landmark climate legislation and first visitor green fee in the nation after 5 years of organizing. So essentially, she goes into a little bit more detail here, where she said, go back to the other Andrew, go back to the other video. I'm just going to pause it. Basically, it says here, so for every tourist in Hawaii who books a $400 hotel room per night, $3 of that will go to climate solutions. Still a small portion, but $3 of that will go to climate solution. Doesn't look like it's a tax on top of it, but it does look like it's going to be included. Will go towards climate solutions. Because of our tourism industry, that adds up to $100 million a year for climate forever. So this is a policy that's really important for Hawaii. If you think about it, there's so many people that travel to a place like Hawaii for a lot of different reasons. Hawaii is a gorgeous place. I just visited about a couple months ago now. Feels like it was forever ago on the island of Oahu, where Carissa lives, and it's beautiful. But you got to think about the travel there, the amount of planes that go there, the amount of boats, the amount of gas that's being used, the amount of people that are just going in there and, to be honest, like kind of ruining some of the essence and the culture and the environment as they are just being there. And you need to have somewhere or a pot of money and funds to be able to help and make sure that the corals are in good shape, make sure that there's no cumulative effect like development, tourism in terms of people like hitting the coral by accident. Not saying it's on purpose, but what happens. And if you don't even though you're not allowed to wear certain sunscreen, if you don't wear the certain sunscreen, if you're wearing a bad sunscreen, you can kill the corals or you can damage the corals further. So having a fund that helps restore not only the marine environment, but the land environment for the people of Hawaii who are inviting people to come. They're not saying that they don't want people to come, or most of them don't want people to come, but there's a cost at that, and that's to the environment which they live and survive off of, and they need. And so having this fund or this climate solutions cost will be really important for the island of Hawaii, the islands of Hawaii. And I think that's something that I feel is going to be, we're going to see that more and more. Locally, Niagara Falls, it's a huge tourist spot. They actually have a tourist tax, and not a lot of people like to pay it, but we pay it. And because they need to, revitalize Niagara Falls, they need to make sure that they can continue to, basically the tourists who enjoy it will have to pay for it. So that enjoyment and pay for that revitalization, pay for restoration and all that kind of stuff, and making sure that it's protected. So I just wanted to go through that because that's a quick thing, because I think it's really important that we look at that. Now let's go to the next thing. And this is just, I'm going to go quickly over this because I don't want to do too long of an episode, but a frill shark, this I saw today as I was looking at it. And I think it's something that's of interest because Melissa Marquez, a good friend of mine, she is a contributor for Forbes magazine. She's an author, she's a social media influencer, she's been on Shark Week, a TV personality, National Geographic. She's done a lot of things, even taken a bite from a crocodile on the leg. I've told that story a number of times. I still can't believe that actually happened. However, we are going to be talking about something that's really important here, a bit of a discovery, really. The first male frilled shark found in Chilean waters. This is kind of cool, so you can read it here. I'll put the link in the show notes. But it just basically says, this frilled shark was first described in 1884. It's one of the deepest sea creatures. It looks like like it swam straight out of prehistoric times, it says here. And to be honest, it scares a lot of people when they see it. It's a very long shark. It almost looks like a big snake. It's got like these white eyes, which is kind of interesting. And you can really see the frilled gills here. And I think it's a really interesting species. But there haven't been seen many, despite its wide but scattered distribution in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Very few frilled sharks have ever been observed or collected. Fewer than 40 specimens actually have been documented since it was first described, making each new find scientifically valuable. So in a recent study, researchers reported a rare discovery, a male frilled shark caught off Chiloé Island in southern Chile. Not only is it the first confirmed male of the species recorded in Chilean waters, it also extends the known range of the frilled shark in the southeast Pacific by roughly 530 miles, so 850 kilometers southward. So that's really cool. And so this is just, it goes on to talk about, some of the depth. So it was actually at a depth of about 500 meters. So that's 1,640 feet for my American friends. And so they were caught in 2015. They were actually granted access to look at it in 2023, hence why it's taken so long to publish on it. In total, 48 body measurements were taken to compare this male to the previously known female specimen that was collected, as well as frilled sharks documented in other parts of the world. Now, so there's been a couple of different things. So the two Chilean species shared no significant morphological features, but the researchers did find some anatomical variation when comparing them to specimens from other regions. So they noticed that the Chilean sharks had longer heads and smaller pelvic fins relative to their total body length. These differences fall within a known range of variation of the species, but could also be influenced by the sexual dimorphism or the preservation method. So essentially, the sexual dimorphism is that males are different size than females. This happens in a lot of fish in the ocean. So in males, for example, the pelvic fins can be proportionally larger than the females, but still the sample size is too small to really draw any firm conclusions. And the research team noted that further studies would be needed and more specimens would be needed to determine whether these differences are typical of the region's frilled shark population. Now, what's interesting too is that when you have such a length and in the geography, like a difference in geography of where these are collected, and maybe even just a difference in the morphology, if there are enough species to tell, maybe this becomes two different species. We don't know. We can't even tell right now. This is a complete assumption, a complete guess, but that'd be something that I would be interested in seeing what's going to happen. But they need more specimens. I just thought this was kind of cool because it always makes the news if there's a video of a frilled shark. It always does well. On the internet. Look, if you look at this, it looks really weird. A lot of people call it a monster. It's in the deep sea. It doesn't come up often. When it does come up, usually it's not alive. And that's just the way it goes. But I thought it was interesting. I thought I wanted to share that with you. Hope you enjoy it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. But let's get back to the rest of the show. So here we go. We're looking, I covered this on Wednesday's episode where I talked to Dr. Andrew Thaler. We talked about the International Seabed Authority and how the metal company, which is a Canadian company, decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to actually talk to the U.S. because there's a guy, President Donald Trump, who might want to be interested in deep sea mining in the U.S. waters, and maybe he'll sponsor me to go to the high seas. Talked a lot about that. Check out that episode with Andrew Thaler. But there was really two big things that came out of that interview that I got from that interview. Essentially, one, that they could go ahead and do deep sea mining within the exclusive economic zones of the U.S. because the U.S. owns those waters. Going outside of those waters and going into the high seas, that's going to be something different because they are not part of UNCLOS, which is the law of the sea. And so that means they are basically disobeying that law. There's no enforcement of that law, but what might happen, as Andrew Thaler mentioned, he's like, hey, you know what? If they start to disobey that law, what's to say that China starts to, and Russia does, and other countries do? And it just starts a really bad precedence. And that's something that we don't want to do. So there is a little bit more to this story. It was developing. I saw this right before I recorded, and I want to talk about it today. So we are going to talk about it. It's going back to Carissa's TikTok, and I think it's pretty interesting because I'm going to let you listen to it, but it's something that I feel is going to be something that we need to talk about. So I'm just going to hook it up or set it up here. So just give me a second. And here we go.
In the deep sea mining lore, and I have to keep you updated. So this is what happened this week. Also, this is our new background because we moved. So about a week
she just
ago,
moved into a new house. It's pretty cool.
An executive order that would unleash deep sea mining as an industry in federal and international waters. This is a devastating blow, but we dive into all of the reasons why on this video that I'll link here that you should go check out. And really quick before we get into the lore, if you do live in the US and you want to be part of pushing against this, we have coordinated a campaign with partners at FutureSwell where you send a one-click email to congressional members. You can send that email at the link in our bio and on our Instagram with our partners at Chile. Okay, so if you guys remember, in December, we had a huge win because Leticia Carvalho, a Brazilian oceanographer who has a really precautionary, level-headed approach around deep sea mining, unseated the head of the International Seabed Authority. And she has started as the leader this year. They've met in Jamaica once. So she's in charge, okay? And the International Seabed Authority is the negotiating body who's supposed to be creating the regulations around what deep sea mining looks like. That's why it's such a big deal that Trump issued the executive order, because he went around this huge international governing body and they clap back. The first way they clap back is they put this FAQ on the International Seabed Authority website, and look, it says, due to recent developments with the U.S. executive order and the metals company, who is the corporation that wants to mine the deep sea. This is actually really good for any of you who want to dive more into the issue, but then they issued a direct statement to the U.S. and it is so spicy. It basically just reminds the U.S. that no state can exercise any rights over the seabed and the mineral resources that are found within it, because it is the common heritage of all mankind. And then she goes on to say that this executive order could destabilize the entire global system of ocean governance. That's what Trump's trying to do. Now, this is an attack on global agreements, geopolitical relationships, and it's also going against the fact that all of these countries have agreed that the seabed is the common heritage of all humankind. And so that cannot be changed just because one president or dictator decides that it should be. So yeah, the clapback was strong, and Team Leticia. Okay, so there's a bit.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing here. I'm just going to turn down the music here, trying to get some background music to go with the vibes. This is an interesting development. So the ISA actually comes out, as Carissa says, and says, hey, you know what? If you do this, if you go beyond your exclusive economic zone, you go into international waters, into the high seas, you are going to take away everything that people have agreed for decades, multiple decades, that all these countries, which is hard to get everybody to agree, but all these countries who have signed on, even the ones that haven't signed on, have agreed that this area is kind of off marks, other than a couple of other, couple of players like that do some illegal activities, which is another problem. But once countries start to do this on purpose, like Donald Trump is trying to do with the U.S. and saying, hey, you know what, if we want to deep sea mine in the high seas, nobody's really going to stop us. True, nobody's really going to stop them. But what it's going to do is that when they want something done or not done in the high seas, or something else done in another UN proposition, then maybe those countries are like, well, if you don't abide by it, why should we abide by it? And to be honest, they're kind of right. These international agreements, although there's no police force to enforce them, they're kind of enforced on themselves, where, if a country does something that it goes against it, they get shamed. For a long time, the International Whale Commission, the IWC, banned whaling. And when the Japanese started whaling in international waters, they were embarrassed. Basically, they were told, like, hey, what are you doing? You're going against all these agreements. You're doing this. You're doing that. And eventually, with some pressure from some nonprofit organizations like Sea Shepherd and others, they eventually went back and said, you know what, this is too much of a headache. We're putting too many people in danger for a number of reasons, and of our own citizens. So we're just gonna whale in our own exclusive economic zone. When you start to, and the sanctions can happen if they start going into high seas and so forth. And so that could be a huge problem for countries. And, we've never really seen this from a country like the U.S. before. Obviously, the president doesn't really care about international agreements. He just cares for what he thinks is good for the U.S., which a lot of people disagree, especially in this case. And so it's ruffling a lot of feathers around the world. It's not making a huge deal because there's so many other things that, like tariffs and other things that people are worried about. But it is going to be a problem if the president decides, we're just going to go ahead and do it anyway. And as Dr. Andrew Thaler said in my interview, the metal company that's a Canadian company that's doing this, that's kind of perpetuating or like kind of pushing this, could be almost out of money and needs to do this deep sea mine. They've been doing this for 10 years. They've been doing this for a long time. And, they are a company that wants to move quickly. They're a company that wants to be able to deep sea mine. And I get it from a business perspective, but also from a perspective of, we don't know what's going to happen to the deep sea if we stop mining or if we start mining. And that is a dangerous situation. If we screw up the deep sea, we could be screwing up a lot of long-term processes that we just have no idea and understanding of from a scientific level and from a nature level, and what we're doing to the balance of nature. The ocean is, covers over 70% of our planet. The deep sea is a big portion of that, and we know virtually nothing about it. So it could be very dangerous in the way that we play. But again, the fact that there's a big push economically to develop this is always the driving force behind trying to mess up the environment. I wish there's a point where we could actually figure out how to develop economically and develop and protect environmentally. I think if we can meld those two together, we can really do some good, but it doesn't seem to happen all the time. But regardless, that's what's been happening. The ISA is like, hey, you know what? We need to say something about this. We're not going to take this lying down, which I'm glad. I'm glad they're putting it out in the open, into the public. Other countries are obviously part of this International Seabed Authority, and this is something that we need to talk about from a world perspective. This is very dangerous in terms of not only just deep sea mining, but just governance, international governance in itself. So that's how we're gonna end off the show. Really interesting thing here. So I'm just gonna get my last little closer here. I think it's this one here. There we go. That's it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for the patience. I know this is a 35-minute episode plus, and so I'm gonna divide these up into little chunks over the weekend so you can take a look, or maybe over the day you can take a look at each of these individual stories. But I want to thank you so much. I'd love to hear what you think of this format. If you would attend live, when would you attend? I'd love to hear that. Hit me up in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you want to hit me up, you can do so at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. Just DM me. And if you go to our website, speakupforblue.com/contact, you can fill out the form. You can get right access into to me. It goes right to my personal email once you fill out the form, and I would love to hear you. If you want to hear the audio version and you're not into the visual version, which is fine, that's where I started on this. That's where I'll probably always be posting. And there will be an audio version of these lives as well, so you're not going to miss any kind of these episodes. The reason why I'm doing the lives is because there's so many stories that are coming out lately that I want to cover them as soon as possible, and I don't want to wait like a couple of days before it gets going. So that's why I'm doing these lives. But if you want to search up the podcast, it's How to Protect the Ocean on your favorite podcast app. I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.